Thanks, Ashwin. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thanks for the Greyhead Media team and the CISO program. The people are conducting, and most importantly, the Enterprise Innovation Summit of 2021. Before I get started, I have a couple of caveats to take. One, I'm representing in my individual capacity, though I work for a global financial institution in the security domain. Number two, whatever I say here is based on my collective years of experience and not attributable to either my current employer or the former employers. So with that, let's get started. Why it is important to have a risk-based threat intelligence for a better cyber resilience, irrespective of the industry segment that we operate in, right? Just to give some background to how complex the cyber crime scenario continue to be, right? There are some kind of predictions that by 2025, the entire cyber crime world will touch to the tune of $10 trillion, which basically means that almost around a tenth of global GDP will be in the realm of cybercrime. So that gives us some indication of the complexity of the problem. Now, many of us work in very different industries, depending on how large, small, medium, global our organizations are. Our complexities are different. Our needs for resiliency are different. Our needs for regulatory compliances are different. But whatever we're going to try today is very, very generic. And it's not that something I have developed. It is something that collectively gathered information from various sources to present some amount of, a uniform approach organizations can take for a better cyber threat intelligence and thereby build better cyber resilience. So with that, let's go to the next slide. Major security concerns that global organizations, or for that matter, even a national or smaller and medium organizations have, right? What are the major security concerns? And in that realm, what are the emerging cyber threats looking like? What is the landscape looking like, right? Once we understand, we need to take a step back and look at how are we as organizations have been responding to the cyber threats that are coming our way, and what is the current problem, right? In terms of using that intelligence to make us better, ready to either detect, prevent, or even to respond and recover from an unfortunate cyber incident. What is the context that is missing? We will cover that. And then what is the importance of looking at a risk-based cyber threat intelligence? Because depending on the complexity of the organizations and complexity of the technology operating models, we end up getting tons and tons of intelligent items on a daily basis. So having a risk-based context to our intelligence and approach will definitely go and help. So with that background, we look at what is basically a cyber threat intelligence process looks like. Many a time, people have a segmented view of the overall cyber threat intelligence process, but there are more nuances to it, more stakeholders, both internal and external. So it's always good to have a broad, comprehensive view of what a cyber threat intelligence process means to any organization. So with that lens, we will look at a case study, which is well known worldwide, a couple of years ago, and how the former intelligent-led approach looked at cyber threat intelligence in that context, and how leveraging a risk-based threat intelligence led to a better incident response by the organizations. With that, we'll summarize what the benefits are, and then you can see the references. As I said, this is not the material that I myself prepared, right? It is a combination of information sets coming from various organizations. And then maybe on the day, we can probably look at some kind of questions if possible. So with that background, so let's quickly jump to what the major security concerns from a information and cybersecurity standpoint for global organizations, right? If you look at, there are 4 different segments that you see at the center of the slide. One is your regulatory landscape. Second is PII, personally identifiable information, and customer identifiable information, CII. And then the technology landscape at the bottom left, and on the right side, you see the emerging threats. So if we look at basically the emerging threat landscape, for example, the pace at which the emerging threat landscape changing is phenomenal in the last 24 months, more so since the pandemic has started. So it makes even more sense to revisit our cyber threat intelligence processes based on what's happening in the pandemic scenarios, right? If you look at the emerging threats, you have more number of state-sponsored situations happening. Industrial espionage continues to be there. You never know, if you have 100,000 people working for you, there is every possibility that your competitor's person on their payroll is also working for you. Depends on what kind of organization that we run, right? Then you have industrial espionage, and then advanced persistent threats. All those are happening at a faster pace than what they used to be. On top of that, with the amount of social media and then the way the socio-economic situations are changing, the expectations of employees in terms of what they want to do and what they want to see is also varying significantly. That leads to more and more number of people potentially disgruntled, leading to insider threats. And then we all saw in 2020, late 2020 rather, what happened in the third-party supply chain channels, which led to huge global shutdowns of various, maybe tens and hundreds of organizations were shut down for a few days. Then external threat actors are there. So that's about the emerging threat landscape. We'll get into details a little more in a few minutes. Then you look at on the left-hand side, global organizations or small organizations or medium organizations continue to evolve their technology operating models. By that, I mean, today you may be operating in all data centers in-house. Potentially a year down the line, you may be looking at, hosted services predominantly, right? For a level playing field, the small and medium enterprises would want to completely go public cloud, and they manage their core business operations go to them so that they will have a level playing field. So then we talk about the IoTs, mobile technology proliferation. All those are changing, technology operating models. The more infrastructure elements that we have within our technology infrastructure, the more complex it gets, the more vulnerabilities we see, the more interconnected leads to a single vulnerability having a huge impact. So those are, the technology landscape. Then we look at on the left-hand top side, regulatory. The world over, the amount of regulatory scrutiny happening because of one, digitalization of every industry segment, small, medium, large, doesn't matter. The digitalization leading to significant amount of customer information being digitized, or even personal information being digitized, which leads to potential impact. So regulators are forced to be more frequently changing the regulatory requirements. That also puts pressure from a security incident response standpoint, depending on which country that we operate in, which region in the global context one operates in. So those are additional security incident response concerns. And more on the right-hand side top, you see the brand and reputational damage. India, for that matter, is becoming well known to be the hotbed for innovation, hotbed for fintechs, hotbed for startups. But imagine a potentially a small breach happening in those fintech companies. Their valuation goes for a whack in no time. And that happened in our Indian context as well. So brand and reputational damage is very, very, increasingly becoming critical. Then if we are trying to acquire companies, right, those days, the due diligence is not necessarily to the extent of the security posture of the organization one is going to acquire. So the amount of diligence is also significantly increasing, which means even if we want to sell off some of our non-core businesses, the amount of scrutiny those businesses will go through is no less than some of the core businesses that one want to operate in. So even from that standpoint, it is becoming increasingly difficult from a valuation of either mergers, acquisitions, divestitures. Cybersecurity is becoming increasingly important element in the valuation of it. Then all the other stuff we talked about. So these are the major concerns happening everywhere across the world. And most importantly, there are use cases that have been negatively impacted in the last 3 to 4 years on each of these domains. So hope this gives you some amount of understanding as to how organizations are facing security concerns, whether it is to run their operations, whether it's to run regulatory compliance matters, or to look at mergers and acquisitions. So hope this gives you some indication, and we'll see a little bit detail what the emerging threat landscape looking like. It's a summary. I'm sure many of you in the audience will relate to it. Maybe one slide will probably refresh the memory of what the emerging threat landscape looks like. So if you look at this particular piece, right, these are the emerging cyber threats, right? It's no particular order, and also it is not necessarily comprehensive, and also it is not necessarily mutually, exclusive, as I said. So just to give some of them, third-party breaches. We have all seen what happened in December 2020 without taking the name of the organization that came about their own breach, leading to almost around 300,000+ customers of a third-party software solution being breached by a nation-state actor. 300,000 global organizations impacted. Cloud data leakage continues to be the problem. Much like the pace at which businesses need to grow, the need to adopt cloud technologies is becoming very, very imminent, and the pace at which the cloud adoption is happening without potentially a comprehensive approach from a risk standpoint to cloud adoption is leading to cloud data leakages. Then, as I said, insider threats, then targeted malwares, ransomware, crypto mining, you name it, right? Denial of service is today, you can get a denial of service probably for less than, a handful of dollars. And even an individual can afford it. And for all these, there are threat actors in the underground and in the big bad world who will give you services at the price of a good shoe, and also will give you a help desk. All you need to do is to have some access to plug that in, and that's it. Somebody else will have control on the global infrastructure of any organization, right? Spear phishing, that continues to be there. Unfortunately, social engineering has become so important that very senior people in various organizations fall victim to it. One of the largest security companies' CEO fell victim to an identity theft, leading to resigning from the company, right? These are all known cases. It's all about awareness. It's all about risk-based approach as to what we are doing and how we are doing it. So without getting into much of the other details of what those threats are, let's look at who the people are behind these threats, right? So you see here, I'm sure each one of you know these. Criminals, as usual, they are interested in money. Hacktivists, which are basically activists who want to hack to prove some points. Criminals, basically their intention is a criminal activity. Your competitors, as we said, it's not that people want to put their own efforts to build IP. When there is an opportunity to steal IP from others, there are organizations which want to do that as well. Foreign nations, gone are those days where a nuclear threat is a significant threat in the world today. It's the cyber threat, which is extremely, extremely imminent and clearly visible. Unfortunately, there is no clear direction, or not necessary direction, but clear infrastructure and framework globally for what we call as the cyber diplomacy, which is very, very important for the country and the world to continue to evolve and progress. Disgruntled employers and employees, we have seen a number of cases over the course of the years. Then you look at what these people are after. You have on the left-hand side, what are the threats? At the bottom, you see who are the threat actors. What are they after? Fundamentally, your personal and financial data, employee information. If it is nation-state actors, state secrets, social security information. We know the scenario where one of the nation-state actors actually breached one of the largest healthcare service provider to get hold of medical information of just two individuals working for a globally well-known defense contractors, right? All they wanted was to find out who they are, how they can manipulate them, and getting healthcare data is a very, very important factor in manipulating emotions of people, right? Then IP, trade secrets, these are all very well commonly known. So these are the things that these threat actors are after using the cyber threat vectors that are there on the left-hand side. Now, look at why they want to do it. We talked about it a little bit earlier, right? It's easy, for example, with all the cryptocurrency, it's easy to, claim ransomware amounts and then disappear into the oblivion and without a trace, right? Financial gains. Everybody wants to, make some more money, however that is. Protest. If global or maybe a nationally important organizations are doing something which the activists see is not in the good interest of the broader community, they protest. Right? They protest to make you or me or any other organization feel their presence and their protest. And that happens. Distributed denial of service is very, very common, or maybe defacing of websites is not uncommon. And we talked about that vandalism, right? Just for the heck of it, they want to do it, right? They want to show the power. There are people who just for the fun do it without knowing the implications of it. Then fame, revenge, all those are factors. So with that, let's see what we currently are looking at. How do they do it? First and foremost is unauthorized access. As I said, for probably $39.95, you can get a thumb drive, which can potentially exploit tens of thousands of vulnerabilities known in the technology landscape. And if you can plug that into anyone's infrastructure with a physical access, and those companies' controls are not up to date to mitigate these tens of thousands of vulnerabilities, you have a control on that network. $39.95 with a help desk. So that is the situation that we are in. Many a time people keep thinking that it is logical access, it is AI, it is ML. Yes, they are good things. But physical access is extremely critical too, right? Penetration of endpoints, exploiting vulnerabilities, social engineering. These are all common ways of exploiting organizations' technology infrastructure. So hope this gives you the emerging threat landscape. It's not any comforting. It's getting to be more than scary for organizations and security teams to manage. And that is the fundamental reason, with so much at stake and so little whether capabilities, resources, manpower, funds, whatever you call it, right? The important thing now becomes is that how do you take a risk lens to what we want to achieve? That becomes the most important factor to keep any potential security incident to be less impactful, for a lack of better word. All right. So how are the organizations responding, right? If you look at this, basically people used to do an incident and the events get reported. Once it is reported, people will investigate, which is predominantly manual. Then once you investigate what this is, then you isolate and contain threats, and then subsequently go and mitigate and remediate. Once you remediate, you start looking at the root cause analysis. But if you look at this is a very archaic way of actually looking at your response mechanism. These are fundamental problems. We are significantly inward focused. We are looking at what is coming our way and looking at them, right? We don't have lack of priority or the data visibility. It's time consuming because it is predominantly manual, right? We don't necessarily have a correlation, right? People will use probably SIM solutions, but technology can do a lot for you if you use a business and risk lens to it, right? So it's more reactive in nature, right? And it is not going to help us detect or respond very quickly. So what do we need to do, right? So this is the fundamental premise of it, risk context, which is predominantly missing. People don't necessarily have 100% view of what we are trying to protect. You look at any global organization, if someone says I have 100% visibility into all the IT assets, that is far from true because of the pace at which your infrastructure keeps changing, right? Do you have visibility into our environments? People may know crown jewels, right? There is definitely that amount of comfort is there, right? Do we have new technologies implemented, right? What kind of current security controls do we have across the infrastructure? So all these are very, very important. And the risk context, without that risk context, looking at the intel alone is not going to help us solve a potential situation. So what we need to do, you need to build an intelligence-driven, approach. So if you look at this, it's always important to look at the strategic way of looking at intelligence. First and foremost, we need to define what is the risk intelligence collection strategy. Without that, we end up getting all sorts of information, which is predominantly noise, which actually, once you build that strategy, rest of the things very, very will follow, right? The tactical steps to the data gathered, and then operational activities to identify and mitigate. So it's very, very important first to define what is the intelligence collection strategy. And many organizations don't necessarily have them in place. It's predominantly tactical, technology solution driven, as opposed to business need driven strategy for intel collection, right? So look at this. This is a pretty straightforward, cyber threat intelligence process. If you look at that on the left-hand side, you see your external intelligence. So you get various sources and you get intelligence from these sources. You have your intelligence internal, right, which is significantly important, having an institutional knowledge. That's why having tenured full-time employees in the organizations with institutional knowledge is extremely critical to manage the intelligence process and at the same time incident response as well. So if you look at the left and right, left side, you see the intelligence sources. What do you need to do? It's a 6-step process. You research, you collect, you enrich, right? This is one thing I would like to spend time on in the next slide. Enriching intelligence is key for attribution, right? So that's what we're going to do. Once you do the process, you will get actionable intelligence, right? And then with that, you will have a contextual data, and then you will be able to generate reports which are useful for decision making and prioritizing your threat alerts, right? So the next step, if you look at the next slide. So this is the case study driven approach. I'm just going to give you a quick view of it. For example, we all know WannaCry, what happened, right? Initial reports said that WannaCry spreads through email. Then initial IOCs are shared and AV coverage was minimal. Security controls were minimal. And then, you had tons of organizations across the world fallen victim to WannaCry. It's an old approach. It's not going to help you immediately respond. And even if they are recover from the situation, right? So how do you do it? So the next step is basically to look at how you can quickly look at leveraging CTI from an intelligence step manner, right? The first top thing remains the same. IOC shared by impacted organization. Then Intel team enriches the indicators of compromise. When you enrich the indicators of compromise, you get to know that, hey, it comes from your SMB service, which is vulnerable, as opposed to the emails. Once you get that intel enriched, it's quick to act on and then say, okay, now let me tell my vulnerability management team to look at it, my security operations team to look at it, and third, my third-party team to reach out to our third parties. So all these can simultaneously happen if the intel is enriched because you have a contextual information to your organization. So once that is done, vulnerability assessment team keeps looking at it, tries to patch things. Security operations keeps monitoring for things which are not patched yet. And the third-party team looks at which other third parties are literally under threat, which can impact our organization as well. And then on top of that, CTA will continue to enrich all the evolving intel indicators of compromise and then continue to feed it. So this is basically the risk-based approach of leveraging threat intelligence for a better detection and response mechanisms. So what are the benefits? There are a lot of benefits. I've covered a few of them. First and foremost is actionable intelligence. Without actionable intelligence, the amount of intelligence we have has no value, right? Capabilities we need to mature over a period of time with right set of skills. Manual efforts can potentially be automated. You can have a comprehensive view of what stakeholders that we need to bring in depending on the enriched threat intel. So these are some of the things. So in summary, these are some of the references you could probably share on the screen as you comes up. In summary, it's very, very important to have a risk-based approach to cyber threat intelligence and thereby enriching the intelligence for a contextually aware detection and response mechanisms for a better cyber resilience. Without that, the rest can only be tactical and at best be suboptimal in terms of our incident detection and response mechanisms. Hope you gathered some information from this presentation for the last 30 minutes, and we'll be happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.